I am really excited for this presentation from Matt and Eve on how pre-sales is becoming the future of every enterprise. I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to let Matt introduce himself and Eve. But Matt, welcome to the Pre-Sales Collective Day 2 Executive Summit, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, James. And just really great to be here today presenting to the group. So, we're going to tackle a really awesome and really interesting topic today around the future of pre-sales, and especially with regard to the enterprise. My name's Matt Darrow. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vivun. We've built the world's first platform for pre-sales. Previously, I was the vice president of pre-sales and product management at Zora, the subscription billing company, from their Series B to their IPO. And I'm joined today by an amazing special guest, Eve Besant, who's the vice president of worldwide sales engineering at Snowflake. And just a quick mic check here, Eve. Let's make sure that we can hear you okay, and maybe let us know, where are you virtually dialing in from today?
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. Eve Besant, and I am calling in from Washington, D.C.
Hey, all right. I'm up here in Lake Tahoe, California, and it's just going to be a great time that we're going to have a lot of good content up front for a lot of the things that are changing in the marketplace for pre-sales. And then we're going to drive a really interactive session and dialogue just between Eve and myself. And for folks that are panelists and participants, you'll notice the question and answer section during the course of this meeting. So please feel free to put Q&A in there. We will save time at the end to make sure that we can address questions directly from the audience as well. But without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. So you know a little bit about the two folks that'll be part of the presentation today, and we'll dive deeper and deeper into sort of Eve's background in Snowflake a little bit later in the presentation. But the first thing that I want to tee up and just discuss is, well, why is pre-sales becoming the future of every enterprise? And the first place that I just want to start to acknowledge is the fact that pre-sales is on the rise. Just look at the turnout for this event. This is an amazing virtual summit that the Pre-Sales Collective has brought together. And the reality today is that pre-sales is transitioning from a sales resource to the most strategic department. But why now? Where is this momentum coming from? What are the changes that are happening in the marketplace that's driving that? And there's really threefold things that we continue to see over and over again. The first is that every company in every industry is becoming a software company. And that software is becoming increasingly sophisticated through services like big data, AI, ML, and that means technical expertise is required to drive revenue in this new world. And that technical expertise, that is the DNA of pre-sales. Second, buyers have access to these products like never before. Trials, freemiums, test drives. This has changed the entire way that customers buy and the expectations that they have. And the center of gravity is now shifting from the relationship that you had with your sales rep to the actual product themselves. And the bottom line for this big change is that buyers are educated. They want to work with experts, and those experts are pre-sales. Plus, buyers are also tired of buying shelfware that doesn't realize and actually deliver the value that they believe that they would sign up for. The third is the pace of innovation for software has completely changed. Previously, when I was running the teams over at Zora, I was still talking about, this is only 5 years ago, our server hardwares, our core site and switch SuperNAT data centers, our failover strategies, our RPO and our RTO times. And that's just no longer the case with modern tools and modern infrastructures as a service, serverless technologies that create really, really low barriers to entry. And the pace of development on those technologies is now insanely fast. CI/CD processes, microservices that can actually be delivered out of band. That means competition can adapt and appear like never before. And the end result is having a constant pulse on the market is what's going to separate winners from losers. And pre-sales is in a natural position where they have 100 times more conversations than any other department in the enterprise based on what they do every single day. But even with these massive changes, B2B companies keep using the same software sales process that has remained largely unchanged since the 90s. That's over 30 years without innovation. And it goes something like this, where folks on the call are probably really familiar. The sales rep owns the relationship, golf, dinners, box seat invitations. The sales engineers are the demo resources, tasked with showing the technology. And remember, it used to be really hard, wheeling around servers, loading disks, configuring and writing custom software. That was a big effort. And then consultants and system integrators were brought in to figure out how to make it work for the customer. And with the rise of subscription delivery models, customer success was added into the mix to help keep a pulse on the account and to spot risk ahead of the renewal. Those were basically triage specialists who could corral and connect the right parties to service the customer. But that approach, given the three big shifts that we just identified, it no longer makes sense. But companies struggle to change. And that results in, first of all, slow sales cycles. Slow sales cycles as the company is not equipped to get experts hands-on with buyers from the very, very beginning. Competitive losses or missed opportunities as intelligence from the field can't make its way back to products fast enough to adjust product market fit, seize those opportunities, and beat the competition. And lastly, high operating costs and frustrated customers dealing with traditional CSM models where individuals have a challenge to solve the customer problem at hand and are really booted up to only broker discussions. Now, this introduction isn't meant to be a doom and gloom presentation. As you may guess, given my amazing guest speaker, there's actually a better way. There's a brave new world for pre-sales and the enterprise, and here is where it's headed. The first realization is that pre-sales never ends. They own the end-to-end customer journey and will be in a position to absorb post-sales and traditional CSM functions into a single department. And why? Well, the pre-sales skill set is the most desirable for both prospects and customers. It increases their satisfaction because you have a technical team who can identify and solve problems before, after, and during the adoption of the product. The second is a single department org structure that creates a seamless handoff and experience for those customers, drives faster learnings and knowledge transfer within the team, and creates joint accountability to ensure that expectations are realized and set properly from purchase through delivery, as well as lowering ultimate operating costs because every team member can add value and solve problems. The second is that pre-sales is responsible for creating a seamless interlock between the field and product engineering. And the rationale and the real reason here is, well, they're the only department that has a vested interest in both worlds. For being honest, VPs of sales and VPs of engineering mix about as well together as oil and water, but pre-sales has revenue targets, but they're also on the hook to ensure that the product functions and works and delivers the value of the solution that they're creating. And they're closest to the challenges at hand, and they're in the best position to be an unbiased source of truth to product and engineering to accelerate product market fit. They're also in the best position to enable selling, which is not really a strength of the product management engineering function and persona type. And that will increase the speed of knowledge transfer back to the field to recover and drive revenue for the business. Lastly, in lower ASP, higher volume segments, AE and SE personas are on a collision course to merge. And the business rationale for this is astounding, where this will shorten sales cycles by reducing the back and forth between coordinating meetings, getting the right people on the phone, and just engaging straight away with the experts. We'll also reduce the cost of sale because hiring quota-carrying staff can work a deal end-to-end. The folks over at Stripe are some of the great sort of indicators of this, where their account executives have a pooled-based model, a pooled-based compensation plan, where multiple individuals work a deal end-to-end, and they work from prospecting to the technical due diligence to legal and close, where they actually hire and staff their account executives who are prior engineers or have come from business schools and hold MBAs. And this has some serious implications that not everybody is really ready for, where either AEs need to become experts to meet the expectation of today's buyers, or SEs need to learn to prospect and close. And that leaves a big open question of who these folks ultimately report to. So Vivun and why we created this company and the VC community that's behind us, that they see these big macro shifts happening. That's why we just announced our $18 million Series A fundraise led by Excel to expand our pre-sales platform to address it. But what I want to dig into is the perspective of somebody that's living it day to day, but has also worked arguably for the most successful traditional and modern software companies of all time. So I'd like to welcome Yves Besant, again, former Vice President of Pre-Sales at SAP, and now Vice President of Worldwide Sales Engineering at Snowflake. Hey, Yves, thanks again for being part of the session today. This will be a great discussion to drive with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So just for the audience, a couple quick questions just to get to know you a little bit. So first, for those that are unfamiliar, Snowflake just had a record-setting IPO. What does Snowflake do?
Yeah, we sure did. It was an exciting day. I guess most simply, what Snowflake provides is a data platform that was completely re-architected for the cloud. So it takes advantage of the scale, the elasticity, the simplicity made possible by the cloud and moves a lot of the traditional data platform workloads to the cloud. Kind of to expand on that a little bit and where we're going from an evolution perspective is really migrating from a data platform to a true data network. So as a critical mass of customers move into the Snowflake environment or in the cloud and can take advantage of this architecture, we really provide a unique ability for customers to share data and exchange information across customers, across providers, across environments, and really create, in addition to a unique data platform, a data network across the entire economy that never existed before.
That's fantastic, and it's amazing to see the absolute tear that the company's been on. And for yourself personally, how did you get started in pre-sales? I know a lot of times there's always an interesting inroad to the career that a lot of people don't even know is a career path.
Yeah, it's funny. I love to ask this question myself because it's something that most of us kind of fall into, and I think I'm definitely in that category. So, coming out of college, I was a liberal arts major. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, so went into the kind of amorphous consulting space and landed on SAP implementations, doing SAP projects. It was something in high demand at the time and seemed like something I could build a great career on. Personally, I also, I've always really struggled to find my voice in the classroom and be assertive and kind of share my point of view. And I knew that was something that was going to hold me back in the working world, and I needed to overcome this fear of public speaking. So when there was an opportunity as part of the consulting effort or consulting role to do train the trainers, to lead presentations in front of customers, I forced myself to put my hand up and kind of rise to that challenge and overcome that fear or impediment that I felt, and found that I actually really loved it. I loved the adrenaline. I loved the sense of completion and the sense of accomplishment that came with that type of deliverable. And I also love the feeling of kind of helping the audience understand something and create clarity that they didn't have before. And that's what I learned about the sales engineering role and the opportunity to make that actually a full-time job. And it really felt like the right fit, and also something that as I practiced it and got more comfortable with it, also found that I had great skills at, and it just seemed to be a great natural transition. So had the great opportunity to move there, and I've made a 15-year career there ever since.
And I can definitely empathize with even starting with SAP. That's how I got into pre-sales ultimately as well. I was writing ABAP code, or I got made fun of. I have Midwestern roots. It was ABAP or ABAP for when it comes to developing on SAP, as well as the performance. A lot of pre-sales folks have a tendency to be musicians and do other things because there's a lot of adrenaline that comes with it. How about, you mentioned, so a decade plus at SAP, now a few years as you've taken over the team and are growing it on massive scale at Snowflake, you doubled down on pre-sales. You didn't switch to sales or product or marketing. What kept you aligned for this career path and to stay in the world of pre-sales?
Yeah, I think it's really two things. Yeah, I love the role. I think it's the perfect blend of being a hunter and being part of the pursuit team and feeling the challenge of going after the sale and kind of all of the thrill that comes from winning, while also appealing to kind of the intellectual and introverted side of me of deeply understanding things and being very thoughtful and kind of in things for the long run and not in being invested. So I love the blend of kind of the sales and the product side and getting to flex both sides of that for my personality and both sides of my interest and curiosity. Yeah, I think the biggest reason though is I love the people who gravitate towards pre-sales. I think of all the teams I've ever been a part of, and they're always full of doers and innovators and thinkers and just some of the most smart and interesting and passionate people that I've met in my entire life in any context. And I think just the camaraderie and sense of ownership and partnership and investment that happens within pre-sales is hard to find anywhere else in the organization. It's certainly a different type of motivation and a different mentality than the sales team, and I think also very different than engineering. And again, the role I think is the perfect blend, and the people who gravitate to it are people that I enjoy spending every day with and feels more like friendships than colleagues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, we'll want to dive into, like you mentioned, how different that role is and how it keeps changing. And we're going to unpack those sort of three big transformations I discussed. Before we jump into that, let's just set up a little bit of contrast, because it is fascinating that SAP and Snowflake, very, very different, but very, very equally successful types of software companies. And you've led teams at both of these incredible places. Could you first describe maybe the perception of the responsibilities at pre-sales? How are they similar, but also maybe dissimilar at each one of those organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you hit on, I couldn't agree more that both are phenomenal companies with phenomenal machines behind them and extremely different and successful in their own ways. So it's been really interesting to kind of compare and evolve and take the best of one and apply it to another and then continue to innovate. So I've thought a lot about this question. If I kind of reflect on SAP first, because that's where I grew up, right? SAP as a company is a machine, right? It's several decades old. There's a lot of history and context and complexity that's built into the ecosystem of software, that's built into the operating model, that's built into each of the roles. And I think that fundamentally defines pre-sales and what it's like to work in pre-sales there, and also what it takes to be successful as a pre-sales engineer at SAP. Our customers have spent decades with the software. Our partners have spent decades with the software. So really having that is almost a requirement of top solution engineers there, is to really have this depth and breadth of knowledge to be extremely impactful. Certainly there's folks on a range of knowledge and a range of tenure, but I think to be extremely impactful, really understanding the breadth of that is really important. So I think to that, different sales, there's a lot more variety in the contributions that sales engineers make at a company like SAP. Certainly the folks that have 20, 25 years of experience are the most trusted, the most listened to individuals in the company. And I think, that's really valuable. But, in order to get 20 or 25 years of experience, you have to put in 20 or 25 years. So, in my last few years, we were really looking at how do we make folks with 3 years and 5 years successful. And it's a much narrower scope that you can play out of the overall context. But I think when you look at the size of the SAP go-to-market teams, and this is true of any big company, and just the variances of roles, there's a much bigger team that comes just around the customer with different expertise, different nuances, different specialties that they contribute to the conversation and to the perspective. And, I think there's a lot of richness that comes from that, and certainly a lot of value, but I think it also limits the prestige of the SE role, because it's one of 25 people that are contributing to a customer, and it starts to just become a piece of the puzzle rather than the primary piece of the puzzle. So if I contrast that with coming to Snowflake, and when I came to Snowflake, it was still quite a small company. I think we had 70 people on the SE team compared to almost 400 today. So it was a much different company. But yeah, we had a very, very, very lean selling motion. It's the SE and it's the AE. Those are the only two people that go kind of at every account that we have. And because of that, I think there was an incredible amount of responsibility for the SEs to represent the entire portfolio, to understand the broader ecosystem, to understand the customer, to understand, a lot of different pieces, but also a simplicity and an agility in working with customers, because the only people you needed to coordinate and get on message and kind of drive towards a customer solution were the two people in that room. So I think, just because of size, complexity, maturity in the market, I think the requirements have been very different on the two different companies, and certainly the way in which the sales teams are structured and the way in which we go to market as an opportunity team reflect that. I will say, as we continue to grow at Snowflake and, more and more customers look at us as their de facto cloud platform, we are adding complexity. So there is nuanced expertise or specialties that are needed and starting to build upon this, but, it's a very different role.
Well, this is, and so much, I think what's so fascinating, even the first time that you and I met, where you had all these interesting learnings from SAP, and the two companies are very, very different, but you're able to, take a lot of those learnings as you boot up this massive team that's growing very, very quickly at Snowflake. But then you're also leaning into and doing things, I would say, that's really pushing the envelope on the pre-sales function, aligned to a lot of the big shifts that are actually occurring. So let's actually talk about, with respect to Snowflake, with some of the things that, we had teed up at the beginning of the presentation for some of those big macro changes around pre-sales owning the journey, the interlock with product, how the roles of AEs and SEs are sort of mashing up and changing together. So for the first point, it's fascinating what you do at Snowflake. And the question here is, do your SEs only work with folks on the purchase side, or do they actually service the customer end to end, right? They work with them after the initial purchase. How do you guys structure it at Snowflake?
Yeah, this has probably been the biggest adjustment, and I think the biggest adjustment for pre-sales, as you highlighted in your intro, where the industry is going overall and how customers are demanding that software companies evolve so that software companies' incentives and salespeople's incentives are more closely aligned to the outcomes that customers are trying to achieve, right? So don't make me pay when I sign your contract. I will pay when I receive value from your software. And so how do we structure, all of our internal processes to truly be customer centric in that way, that our customer success is aligned to Snowflake success, for example. And that's been probably one of the most interesting and I think transformational things that I've seen Snowflake do very effectively. And it's also been a challenge as a pre-sales leader in terms of how do you evolve everything that you've ever known, that it's not about securing the win, it's about promoting successful customer outcomes. And ultimately that's what we're accountable for at the end of the day. It's not just getting the win. And I guess to make one more point on that, one thing I think is interesting about Snowflake is we actually don't collect any revenue when the deal is signed. We collect revenue as customers use Snowflake. So again, there's this kind of alignment to company incentives with customer usage and usage obviously translating into what we see as value. So how do we structure that from a pre-sales perspective, right? If the company is not getting any money or any value from customers until they're actually successfully deployed, fundamentally rethinking what is the role of pre-sales in this, and where does pre-sales stop and post-sales stop, and that's been probably the biggest, as I said, the biggest transformation for us. What's also been interesting is it's very much a land and expand model. So, we may start with a 5K, 10K, 30K deal with a customer to kind of get them to try it and to experience how different it is and to get them thinking about what's possible with Snowflake. And then obviously the intent is to grow these into multi-million-dollar deals. So at what point is it not a pre-sale anymore? Because you think, at what point is the deal like the deal that you're waiting for? So ultimately what we've come to is, we have a lot of pre-sales coverage, and pre-sales plays a huge role in the entire customer journey, running from first meeting all the way through the initial, like, yes, let's try this. It sounds like it might be an interesting solution for these use cases, and all of the traditional pre-sales work to get to that point that we think of. But then, we also play a heavy role in customer onboarding and doing some initial enablement with best practices. We do have a professional services team and a large partner network that we work with from who does the migration, who does the deployment. But pre-sales continues to be involved. I mean, we have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings with every customer, even after they purchase, to continue to troubleshoot, to answer questions, to ensure they're having a good experience and they're effectively migrating. So this has been a big effort for our team this year, looking at what is the entire customer journey, what is the role of pre-sales at each stage in that customer journey, and how do we drive best practices, and how do we operationalize the expectation of what great looks like, and empower our individuals to execute successfully at every step in the journey, not just to get the customer to complete the POC and sign off on the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, when you mentioned to me how pre-sales never ends was sort of the moniker or the frame of reference that hit home completely to me. And again, just to put the fine point on it for folks on the call, right? These are all folks that are essentially reporting right up to Eve as the leader of that organization. And because of that, and because of this dynamic on how you said first meeting to the discovery, to adopting the technology, to then usage and adoption over time, what has that done to compensation? And how has that potentially changed some of the norms on how people think pre-sales is compensated, and how are you using compensation to drive the right behavior in this world where pre-sales doesn't really end?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have several elements of our compensation. We have the growth piece. I mean, that's very important to our company's strategy, is landing new logos, getting people to adopt the platform, and incenting people on growth and on kind of driving additional market share is really important. So that's a piece of our compensation. More and more is moving over to a consumption model. So again, aligning, and this is true for both reps and sales engineers, but aligning when, the customer pays the company when they get value, that's aligned. Now, now we're aligned that when the company gets revenue, we ultimately get paid for the job that was done, because that's really our role on this. And, I think this has driven some really interesting behaviors, because it focuses on, how do you drive consumption with your customers? Certainly it's finding new workloads, it's finding opportunities, it's finding ways to expand, but it's also ensuring that they're effectively using the product. Are they taking advantage of new features? Are they, are their queries optimized in a way to make them cost effective and something that they're motivated to use more of? And, really understand how our customers are using the product. Are they getting the most value out of it? And how do we provide good consultative services throughout the life cycle to really build that trust and to expand the adoption of Snowflake and the enthusiasm for Snowflake within our customer base?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, so almost a perfect lead into the second part of the bullet points here, where you mentioned just the closeness to product and driving adoption of product. Why, when we think about that, creating that interlock between what happens in the field and what happens with product engineering, why are Snowflake SEs such critical inputs to product? But then also, why are they almost the best folks to actually have those insights to then drive back to product, right? What is it about that function that is making them so critical?
Yeah, I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to back up for a second here, because I think there's a really great story about Snowflake that's an important foundation for this. And Snowflake is a GA product, is only 5 years old. I think they started building it 8 years ago-ish. And as they were building it, there was this rapid iteration with customers. So my boss, who also happened to be the first sales rep, he would go out and pitch the idea to customers, get feedback from them, come back and deliver that feedback to the engineers, and they would, do whatever they do to incorporate it. And he would go and pitch again, get feedback, and go iterate on the product. So this idea of rapid iteration, heavy consideration for customer feedback, customer needs, prioritization of what we're hearing in the field is like a fundamental part of the DNA here, and I think is a critical reason for why Snowflake has had the success that we're very responsive to customers and very plugged into the needs of the field. Now, when you're 10 engineers and 1 sales rep, like that's a fairly easy thing to accomplish. Now we are 400 sales engineers. I don't know how many people on the engineering side, and what we strive to do is preserve that same culture, to provide that same feedback loop, that same insight, so that we're constantly listening to our customers and not developing things in a vacuum because we think they would be interesting or because of some pontification that occurred in a conference room. And, I actually think we've, at scale, been able to maintain this decently well. We have a quarterly process with product and engineering and PS and folks from around the organization. I think now it's up to about 60 folks that participate in that. But one of the big challenges and things we're looking to evolve with Vivun is how do we evolve the operations around how we prepare for this? I mean, right now it's very kind of sneaker neck. We have people on individual opportunities who identify needs, prioritize them, associate revenue, and we do this kind of manual roll up to it. And it's super valued input. For what it's worth, we're always selected to go first in these presentations back to product on what our customers need. And, we take about 2 hours to go through all of this content. But, I think as you scale an organization, as you operationalize that, it's such an important piece of maintaining that connection to customers and, that DNA that we had when we were so small that makes these new startup companies so disruptive and so beloved by customers. So, I think I just at one last point, I think that, I think SEs and particularly the model that we have at Snowflake where SEs are engaged through the entire customer journey and are the technical and business contact in the field for these customers. I mean, we're deeply embedded. We understand our customers' workloads, their needs, their priorities. And we understand the product at a different level of depth than sales or anyone else who's out in the field. And I think, that combination of perspectives and that everyday exposure to what our customers want. I mean, there's no better authority to be the voice of what our customers are saying, in addition to the customers themselves.
Yeah. Well, I love the way that you thought that you framed up, the 8 years ago start and the 5 years GA product, and just being able to take advantage of a lot of those modern development practices and tactics and technologies to make that possible, where even for my prior life and world, it was really hard to deliver changes because the tool set has changed so much with what new companies can have access for and how they deliver and how they service their technology. You and I, we had a brief conversation prior. I wondered if you would be okay, sharing the story, which is just the contrast of like the development pace almost of even, traditional companies like an SAP or folks maybe where I've come from versus like Snowflake. You talk about this rapid innovation, but I'm not quite sure folks have the appreciation like how often you guys are actually shipping production features and how that's actually very, very different than maybe more of a waterfall approach where there's like 1 or 2 big releases a year that a lot of companies sort of have as their marching orders.
Yeah, and that's been one of the most amazing and eye-opening things about Snowflake is we release every week. We have new features, we have bug fixes, we have things that make it into the product code every week, which certainly at the beginning was critical, right? As we were deploying with our first customers and really innovating on the fly, we wouldn't have survived without that pace of innovation. And I think, built us a lot of trust and a lot of strength in relationship and our ability to be so responsive and to be so customer centric in our deployment model. We continue to do that. I mean, I think we're getting a bit more governance, particularly around features and driving more to a roadmap and kind of maturing in that perspective. But, still it's a matter of, we can still deploy things within quarter. There'll be major priorities that come in from big customers and they'll say, we really need to be able to do X or we need to pull X forward. And, we're regularly kind of prioritizing and reprioritizing as a team of like what matters and how do we get this out the door quickly. And, we can make decisions within a day or two that we're going to reprioritize something if it's that significant. And I contrast that, I mean, particularly with on-prem models when I first started my career and, once a year, year, we would get the big update and all the things you had to learn and test and update our demo environments. And it certainly was much easier from an SE perspective, but it wasn't as great of a customer experience. And so I think, the delight with which our customers meet this certainly outweighs the internal operational things that we need to go through to be so agile and nimble. But yeah, I think it's something that's hugely differentiating for, kind of young, newer, smaller companies. That is something that every pre-sales organization and every company will have to come to struggle with, is how do you become as responsive and as customer-centric as folks that are super agile?
Yeah, especially not just to respond to their needs, but then as you're doing these weekly deliveries, taking that back out to your global organization. So the third topic too that we wanted to touch on was I sort of teed up this AE and SE collision course persona understanding of sort of what the skill sets would become. And I think when we chatted previously, right, when you sell into the large enterprise, it's a tough sale. There's politics involved, procurement processes, expertise in different domains, and having separate and distinct roles, makes a lot of sense. But if we're looking at, higher volume transactions, maybe lower ASP deals, where I gave the Stripe analogy earlier, there are different models emerging. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, what are some of the biggest changes being required of the traditional sales rep, in today's world to be successful? How are they starting to evolve as well?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, my initial reaction when you brought this up is there's no way, right? And I think that was my aversion to ever doing prospecting and cold calling and all of the negotiating, the things in the sales rep job that kind of terrify me as a sales engineer or just don't fit my persona. But yeah, I've really given this some thought and looked around our business at the different segments, right? So how do you look at the high volume, small company and what that customer requires of you, and how is that different from the large enterprise? And what is the best way to service your customers? What are they looking for from you as a vendor? And I've also looked at who are some of the most successful folks in each of those segments. And what's amazing, especially, take the biggest accounts out of it, right? So take your Fortune 100 out. But as you get into the masses with our customers, I mean, what they really want is somebody who can understand what they do and apply technology to it. And there's really not a whole lot of use for a sales rep that can't do that, because at that point it's overhead. It's a meeting organizer. It's kind of a glorified admin at the end of the day. So when I look at some of our most successful SEs, many of them have become sales reps in the higher volume spaces and are crushing it at that, because they can meet the customer's needs and can do it quickly and be all things that the customer needs. So I think there's more and more of a focus on bringing deep expertise and really understanding what you sell and understanding what the customer's needs are in that space. And I think less and less of a value on the experience of buying and just managing the relationship, accepting the large enterprises where you need to manage the complexities of the contracts and kind of all of that piece. So I think, particularly for sales engineers that have that hunt instinct in them that kind of gravitate towards that piece. I mean, I think there's such a potential on both sides of the aisle to have, an amazing impact. And I think it depends on the product and the complexity and what it takes to sell it. But I do see a world where folks who can bridge that gap are going to set the bar and set the pace for what a great sales rep looks like. And, those that care to stay in the relationship space only and really not become a master of what they sell will soon become obsolete.
Mm-hmm. And I'll put you on the spot with the tough question of if the skills are converging, is it more likely that AEs will develop more expertise, or more likely that SEs are going to get better at building pipeline and closing deals?
It's a good question. I think I think that the way in which the industry will build pipeline and generate demand will become more digital and more automated. And this, like, I don't know about you, I get a million emails a day about, come check out my solution for X, and I've never replied to them. So is that function really working in the technology and the customer experience that people expect today based on their consumer experience? So, I think that the prospecting side of it will have to so fundamentally change that, really it's the SEs that will step up and take a bigger role and probably provide more value than the people who bang the doors down. But, I'm heavily biased, that might be a little bit of my job protection instincts in it as well. But that's just where when I see the most valuable folks in the sales cycle and most valuable contributions, particularly in the kind of the middle portion of it, it's all about knowing what you sell and what your customer business is.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that, it's great to see from seeing it and living it as well, where after decades, as we were talking about at the beginning, right, 30 plus years, right, things didn't really change, and then now every company can be a software company. That software can be delivered, like you guys are describing, every week. New code is shipping. We're responding to the feedback of the marketplace, and it just has this limitless opportunity potential that it's creating this evolutionary step in the B2B enterprise, and pre-sales is really at the epicenter. So I want to make sure we take hopefully save some time for Q&A as well. But to just sort of wrap up for a couple of the other topics before the Q&A is a very, very simple picture, which is no technology has ever been deployed or developed to enable the shift across these different dimensions. Pre-sales, traditionally the assets and the team that's doing the demonstrations, never really had dedicated focus because it was always just a really hard challenge to just plug the technology in and show it and make it work, versus actually going and being able to drive a lot of these transformations. So for us at Vivun, right, we know it because we've seen it, we've lived it from our prior lives, and that's actually why we built our solution, where our customers can retire their CRM customization, say goodbye to a bunch of disparate tools, have one productive place for pre-sales to call home across the full customer journey, as well as establishing this two-way exchange of information between the field and product, underpinned by data science from a world-class AI team, all in the name of driving more revenue as effectively as possible. So for us, we wanted to do this session today as well because, well, we're fanatical about building technology as a technology company at Vivun, but also just elevating the role of pre-sales, which is why I love engaging in the discussion with you today, Eve, and why, it's phenomenal knowing, Eugene and James from the pre-sales collective. One of the things for audience attendees to just know, in the summer, we actually launched the industry's first pre-sales benchmark study. This winter, we're launching the second edition with a deep focus on compensation, especially when it comes to a lot of these nuances of how the role is changing. We'd love for you to participate. We welcome you to participate. You can just register directly on vivun.com/benchmark to be part of the discussion. If you participate, the results will be sent your way as well. So with that said, we've got about a handful of minutes left here. Hopefully we can scan the Q&A together and pull out a couple questions here for the audience. Let's see. And James, I don't know if you're still out there too to help us with a little of the Q&A. I'm going to go. I wasn't able to moderate this as we went through, but I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that we saw in there that we want to pull out to have a little live Q&A for.
Yeah, I am more than happy to help with some Q&A. So one, thank you both for an amazing conversation. This is really good, really fantastic. And I think it's only the start of more conversations we want to have around this. I've seen a lot of really good questions, and I even asked a question, but I won't ask my question first. I think Anne asked a good question with increasing product complexity. There's sometimes too much to know about the technology to be an expert, right? So, what is the model that works that SEs can know enough in the product offering? I like to call that depth to be dangerous, without knowing everything top to bottom and losing credibility if they don't.
Yeah, this is literally the conversation that we're having right now, right? As you add use cases, as you add industry, as you kind of layer in all of this stuff, at what point, either do you break the team, or are you looking for such a rarity that you can only have a team of 10, or is it just, physically not possible? So, I guess my thoughts on this is maintaining that perspective and that continuity across the story. Somebody who can understand the end-to-end and position at a 1 to 200 level of depth, I think, is critical in keeping that clarity for the customer, providing that holistic context. How does this all fit together? How does it map to your business challenges, to your technical challenges, and really, presenting the entire vision. And that's been critical for us to keep that tie. So every account has one consistent sales engineer who always works on that customer, who understands that customer better than anyone else. But then how do you supplement that person to provide additional depth and expertise? So they're kind of the grandmaster puppeteer, and how do you give them, security expertise? How do you give them expertise in, data science or whatever different strengths and technologies or parts of the ecosystem that the customer wants to know about, but we never disengage that primary person because they're super important for the trust, they're super important for the relationship, for the context, and then they can help the other players become successful and credible and in context with the broader story.
Yeah, no, that's good. So let me ask a follow-up question. This is my own personal question that came up earlier. You talked about how fast-paced Snowflake is, right? And how your product releases are coming out weekly. How do you ensure your SE teams are managing customer expectations with what sounds like a shifting roadmap?
Yeah, this is a constant conversation and a constant reinforcement to the team. You sell what's on the truck. If anything is not on the truck, it is not part of the conversation, and if you must absolutely talk about it, here is the language and here are the caveats and all of the ways in which we do that. And we're very emphatic about how you position roadmap and also how we expose our roadmap. I know some companies make it available publicly, and it's very much a firm commitment of here's what we're driving to. But until COVID, we didn't even present our roadmap virtually because we were concerned about people taking screenshots and over rotating on what the level of commitment is. So, this is directionally where we're headed. Target timelines, but not firm commitments until it's moved into GA.
Perfect. No, thanks for that, right? Because I think there's a lot of companies, it sounds like it's expectation setting, who just don't put it out there and they sell that snake oil and it bites the pre-sales team later, and you're the one who gets sometimes caught fighting the fire. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think to your point that that the fact that people are engaged through the customer lifecycle, like you have to be really careful about what you oversell because you're still there when they're trying to cash the checks that you wrote. So there isn't this, I just need to get it across the line and sell it and whatever I need to say to do that. Like there's no temptation to do that because you're cashing the check and you're not getting paid until they can actually use it. And if one of the requirements is we need this feature in order to put our workload and go live and they don't do that, then you're getting $0 on their consumption because they're just waiting.
Yep. Well said. Well said. And I think that's a great way to end. Matt, do you have anything to add on those two questions? I know I kind of pitched them to Eve.
Well, I think I would just echo both of what you guys were talking about as well. Like for us, from a technology provider, so much of that, how do you use technology to create this seamless interlock between these two worlds? It's a two-way street because you need to have transparency in both directions, the needs of the market. But then as development occurs, in a world where it occurs so fast, we need to plug into the vein of reality of engineering and then ship that back out to the global field so it's always clear what's on the truck, to Eve's point.
Oh, that's great. Well said. Eve and Matt, thank you both so much for your time today. Really appreciate this presentation. Matt, appreciate you and the Vivun team helping make this event possible through sponsorship. I mean, it's amazing to see what both you guys are coming up with and doing for the industry generally. So just want to say thank you guys for both for sharing your time today.
Excellent. Thanks for having us.